Okay, I guess this is a good time to start talking about infectious diseases. This is chapter 8 out of 10 chapters for general pathology. If you recall, in chapter 6, we talked about diseases of generally inflammatory nature in regards to antigens, which we inherently have in our body. These were the so-called autoimmune diseases. In Chapter 7, we talked about diseases involving mutations of gene that regulate growth, which were neoplastic diseases. Now we'll be talking about diseases due to antigens that are extrinsic to our body, which are generally referred to as infectious diseases. I also would like to say that I enjoy doing this chapter very much, but it's difficult sometimes to tread the fine line between what is important in terms of pathology and what I already know you people will be learning in things like microbiology and immunology. So I absolutely do not have the time or the desire to go over all of the infectious diseases in detail because they will be covered from your microbiology courses or in the sections we do on systemic pathology. So that's why we will be breezing through a lot of things. Another thing I want to warn you about for infectious diseases as an introductory statement is that a lot of these pictures are going to look very busy. They're going to have a lot of charts, a lot of small print, and I'm not too sure how YouTube is going to handle it. I know that my big files will be quite adequate in terms of image resolution, but when YouTube crunches this down, you may have a very hard time seeing things. Nevertheless, I'll keep my big files, and if you really need to see some of this stuff, I know you're going to email me and ask me anyway. So let's start to do the chapter. In fact, let's not start to do the chapter. Let's do something that I usually save at this point in the course called a rant. And I'll try to keep this rant short because I had a nice introduction that took up a lot of time. We're going to talk about AAA. And you know, all of this stuff that I teach you in pathology doesn't make a damn bit of good for you unless you really have to understand what you really have to learn. Now, I can teach you about pathology, but your success as a practitioner will have nothing to do with how well you do on my exams or memorize what I tell you. Your success as a real American doctor with a real license will depend on AAA. And this is something that is known universally in private practice, and you may never have any references to it in regular medical school, so I want to tell you right now. You are going to be successful only if you have AAA. And they're in this order. The first A stands for availability. The second A, which is the second most important thing, stands for affability, or how well you relate to people, how well you are known as a nice guy, so to speak, even if you're a girl. And the third A represents ability. Isn't that amazing? Because you can get uh, the highest score on my exam and be a pathology genius, but if you're not available for consults or you're not known as being a nice, affable guy, and you are only able, which is the third A, you're not going to be very successful. So keep that in mind. Number 1A is availability. Number 2A is affability. Take your referrals out for dinner every now and then. Meet their families. The third A is ability. And believe me, you'll all have that. And that's why it's the least most important. Let's talk about the phylogeny of infectious agents. Uh, I guess we could move up or down the evolutionary tree if you want to think of it that way. At the very lowest level, we have classes of infectious agents which don't even have DNA, and those are called prions. Most infections in humans are either viruses or bacteria, so that's why they get the big asterisks. If you want to include fungi, we'll add a third asterisk. But remember, if you really want to be thorough and classify the categories of infectious agents, you have to move up the tree from prions to viruses, including viruses like bacteriophages, plasmids, and transposons, which infect basically other infectious organisms like bacteria and do not affect man themselves if you want it to be complete. And then we'll have our whole category of bacteria of various types. Then we're going to have our obligate intracellular organisms that can't live except if they're living somewhere in your body or your cell, like chlamydia, rickettsia, mycoplasma. Then we'll have somewhat higher organisms called fungi, which basically can be classified of various types, but from pathology point of view, they're either yeasts or hyphae. And then we'll have these big critters called parasites, which if they are only one cell, they're called protozoans. If they're more than one cell, they're called metazoans. Generally speaking, metazoans and worms are pretty much synonymous. Technically, arthropods have a lot of cells, but they're generally known as ectoparasites, whereas these other two are primarily endo because the ecto pretty much stay outside or mostly outside the body. So this is going to be the evolutionary model that we follow. And I hope this next picture here doesn't blow your mind, and I hope you could see it too. So if I can't, I apologize, because there are going to be a few pictures like this. Let's look at some of the properties of these general infectious pathogens. We talked about their taxonomy, going up from viruses to chlamydia to rickettsia to mycoplasma to the higher bacteria to fungi to protozoa to helminths. And these can generally be thought of as evolutionary progression, but as you know, the viruses are just as smart as the helminths in terms of the fact that they've been able to live just as long. We're talking about more of an anatomic complexity here. Generally speaking, the sizes of infectious particles range from, let's say, 20 nanometers up to 10 meters if you have a 30-foot long worm in your intestine. And we're going to talk about their sites of propagation too. For example, viruses, chlamydia, rickettsia, you can't culture them. They have to live inside of cells. So that's why they call them obligate intracellular. When you get to the mycoplasmas, they can be extracellular, but most common infectious agents like bacteria, fungi, protozoas, involve propagation either through skin, mucosa, facultative intracellular, extracellular, and they basically have a very intimate relationship with human cells and human tissue boundaries called mucosa. We're going to give samples of each one. And we're not going to go into the actual specifics of all of these organisms. We just don't have the time. I'm assuming you're going to either get that from micro or get that as you know it, and I am not planning to go into any extensive discussion on each one. So here's some sample species for a virus. I think a good general goal for this chapter would be if you heard of a disease, you should instantly be able to classify it as whether it's from one of these 6 or 7 categories. Now, you should know polio is a virus. You should know that trachoma is chlamydia. You should know that rickettsia, or Rocky Mountain spotted fever, or typhus fever is rickettsial. You should know that mycoplasma pneumonia is mycoplasma, which is different from bacteria or viruses. You should know if you hear a disease like cholera, pneumonia, tuberculosis, that these are different types of bacteria. You should know if you hear a disease like tinnias, thrush, sporotrichosis, histoplasmosis, that these are fungi. You should know giardia, sleeping sickness, Chagas disease are protozoans, so is Kala azar. We'll mention these briefly. And if you hear a worm disease, whether it's a nematode or some other type of worm, uh, like enterobia, filariasis, or trichinosis, you should know that these are helminths. Thank you very much for now.